progress.
Happy Easter. Easter is a time of many different celebrations. So some of our siblings in the world are celebrating a resurrection. Some of us are celebrating the miracle that the story of Jesus and his works and his message survived, even though the Romans killed pretty much everyone they came across who was telling that story or living that message, usually in some ugly way. But we still know about that story. We still feel the impact of that message. Some of us are celebrating the miracle that even in an overwhelmed populace subject to divisive rhetoric everywhere, we continue to discover the miraculous in ourselves. The miracle is that we ordinary humans sometimes rise to the challenge and become miracles ourselves. So, at approximately 100 years ago, when I was working at CompuServe, I met with my roommate and some friends from his church, and we would have conversations about how following Jesus affected our lives in the present day, 2,000 years after his death. And we were earnest human beings, most of us guys. I think there were a few young ladies there, talking about what the church calls us to do, how we're supposed to be in the world. Except that often what those conversations ended up being was finding some way of deciding who was truly deserving of our charitable efforts and who was unworthy, and therefore disposable. I didn't feel strong enough at the time to point out that what we were doing was finding ways to demonize and thus abandon those whom we were supposed to be caring for in certain of our thought cases. But I stopped attending those lunches. We were wanting to follow Jesus' example, but we would flinch at the crucial moment. We would retreat when it became too difficult, when it was obvious this is too much to ask, too much to expect of us. At the other end of the spectrum, the story of St. Francis of Assisi, who gave away all his possessions, walked away from the comfort and riches of a noble house, treated everyone with compassion, cared not for public opinion, wore a silly hairstyle, begged for food and resources. In some ways, I think that is more difficult than actually becoming a martyr and dying for your faith, because you continue to live, you continue to struggle, knowing that society does not welcome nor esteem you, but judges you a fool or a failure or both, and certainly won't follow you on Instagram. How are we to go beyond ease and respectability in true comradeship? How do we embody love winning? There has to be some middle ground here, right? I don't really believe that Jesus expects us to give away everything we own, not abandon our place among friends, not deny our own human needs, and yet still be a little more kind than necessary, a little more generous than the people asking deserve, a little more aware of those in the room or just outside the room who might be welcomed in. And the thing is, I think that's what my friends at CompuServe were actually asking. How much is too much? What is the line between acceptable generosity and foolish culpability? That desire for respectability, for comfort, for a place at the table is understandable, and it's pernicious. What will the others think? If my car is too old, if my laptop is too clunky, the others will think me incompetent and stop hanging out with me. When the laughter begins to feel like it's at me instead of with me, it affects our human brains in the same way as physical trauma. It hurts. We are hardwired to avoid that kind of suffering. It is natural to turn our backs on those outsiders so that we remain insiders and don't suffer the pain of exclusion. So it really is miraculous to turn the other cheek. It is astonishing, truly remarkable for us humans to prioritize our own self-interest below the well-being of the unfortunates outside our circle. We cannot help but be impressed by, yet also probably wary of, those who frequently tend to the needs of those whom we find somehow undeserving. Most of us in this room recognize this struggle. Most of us are generous with our time or our emotional energy or our material goods. Most of us try to be a little more generous than we need to be, while also being mindful of our place in the various social circles. I do believe that most of us here and out here are trying, are working at it. I know that many of us are because I've had the conversations with you. I know that's one of the reasons we attend this church. And these days especially, it's difficult. Striking the balance of self-respect, charity, social connections has always been difficult, and more recently, as we know, more loved ones with long COVID and face economic turmoil and a never-ending carousel of bad news on our feeds, local, national, and global news that depresses us, our ability to fully meet our own needs feels imperiled. Stressed out, overwhelmed, exhausted, we can barely find the energy to care for ourselves and those in our immediate family. How are we to answer our conscience's call to rise to the challenge of deep compassion for others? It would take a miracle. That's what I hear us thinking. As Ellen Cooper reminded us in our first reading, feeling forsaken is not the same as being forsaken. The story of Easter tells us death doesn't win, love wins. We cannot have Easter without Good Friday. We cannot have miracles without difficult circumstances. It is precisely when things are most difficult that our choices are most powerful. It's when our circumstances are most exhausting that one more yes can conjure the miraculous power that has always been at the core of the human heart. When we are as surprised as others around us, then our example not only energizes the ones witnessing it, but also nourishes our own spirit and tips us into that strength and resolve that we need. It's not easy. It is certainly not common. It can be astonishing when we decide to be the miracle, to embody the promise of companionship, to enact Easter for ourselves, for our families, for those around us. Let us not expect such miracles. Let us be gentle with ourselves and others. But when we see others performing a miracle, let us support them and help sustain and shape the marvel around us. And when it becomes apparent that this is our time, let us acknowledge and embody the miraculous truth inside us that love, in fact, does win. So may we be. So may we act.